Well, why is the U.S. ramping up drone strikes in Somalia and killing civilians? Now, if we weren't so jaded to this, it should be shocking, but unfortunately, it's not unusual. These are not targeted strikes, as if there were such a thing. Local reports say that strikes over the weekend killed at least 12 civilians, including 8 children, 3 women, and an elderly man. Now, based on antiwar.com's count, the latest U.S. bombing in Somalia brings the total number of airstrikes in the country to 96, just since Trump took office. This surpasses the previous annual record of airstrikes when Trump was first in office in 2019. Previously, that record was 63. And since we're counting, President Biden launched a total of 51 airstrikes in Somalia throughout his 4 years in office. President Obama, in 8 years, launched 48. So why are they doing this? Joining us to discuss is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com, who's been trying to yell about this on X and not really getting a ton of response on it. Dave, good to see you. Why is the United States doing this, and why is the media ignoring it?
Well, those are good questions, and that's what I've been trying to figure out. I mean, you mentioned the numbers there. This is really unprecedented, the rate at which the U.S. has been bombing Somalia this year. And just to update you, I wrote another one today. It's 97 now, 97 airstrikes. And this is according to U.S. Africa Command numbers that they've given me. And, I think it kind of downplays the bombing because the way the U.S. military counts an airstrike is if they hit one target with a few, it's not like each airstrike is one missile. Each airstrike could be a major attack. So again, this is really just an unprecedented level of bombing. And to me, the shocking thing about it is that when I say it gets no media coverage in the U.S., I mean none, zero. Most of the time, it is just me, and I'm not working with much information. It's based on basically what AFRICOM is putting out in press releases and what they decide to tell me, which is not much. And it's really tough to figure out the situation on the ground in Somalia for a few reasons. One reason is that in the al-Shabaab controlled areas, which is al-Shabaab is the group that we've been at war with since 2007 when they first emerged. In the areas that they control, they restrict the use of internet and phones. But also the government that the U.S. backs arrests journalists and all the time and restricts journalists who report critically on the country's military security forces and on the war with al-Shabaab. And so it's just, and so you have those factors and the fact that literally no American media is covering this. So it's really hard to know what's happening on the ground. As you mentioned over the weekend, it does look like U.S. airstrikes killed at least 12 civilians in one attack. There were some major battles in southern Somalia against al-Shabaab. So, I mean, the question for me is, why does this just get ignored? I mean, the fact that nobody seems to care, even kind of in our world where people are more aware of these wars and things that are happening overseas, it just doesn't really register for many people. And then why are they continuing this? Why have they ramped this up? When you look at Somalia on a map, obviously it's in a very strategic area. And people think it might be related to its location in respect to Yemen. But the fact is, the U.S. kind of has a simpler way to get access to those ports. The Somaliland in northwest Somalia, which has essentially been a de facto independent country since 1990. They've offered the U.S., if you recognize our independence, you can get access, to all of our ports. So what I think, I kind of think this is just a holdover of the war on terror. The U.S. government created this killing machine, and they want to keep using it. And we're seeing them bring it to our hemisphere now with these strikes on the boats. But this is also still going on, over in Africa. And it's actually 2 wars that the U.S. is involved in. I mentioned al-Shabaab. They first popped up in 2007 after the U.S. backed an Ethiopian invasion of Somalia that essentially carried out a regime change in Mogadishu. They ousted this coalition of Islamic groups. And then al-Shabaab was the radical offshoot and started attacking Ethiopian troops. And then since then, we've been at war with them. And then in 2015, the al-Shabaab split and there was an ISIS affiliate created. And now we're also bombing them in the northeastern Puntland region. A lot of the airstrikes are up there as well.
To what end do you think? Are they threatening any American troops? Will it work to alleviate suffering of any civilians there? Like, what is the point?
It's kind of similar to Afghanistan in the fact that we're propping up this central government that's very weak, that wouldn't exist without U.S., EU, African Union support. So, like, to what end? I mean, we'll probably be doing this until the U.S. decides that that's basically enough and gets out of there, and then the government will collapse, similar to Afghanistan, unless they do decide to negotiate and make peace. The thing with al-Shabaab, that you always see this in the press releases. They say, "Oh, al-Shabaab, they're a global threat," and that's because I think in 2012 they declared their loyalty to Al-Qaeda. So they're an Al-Qaeda group. In Syria, the Al-Qaeda guys are our allies now, but in Somalia we got to keep bombing them. But the claim is that al-Shabaab's a global threat, but there's just no evidence to back that up. They have carried out terrorist attacks in other African countries, but the common thread there is that they targeted the countries involved in the African Union mission fighting against them. But that's what they would tell you, like if you were to ask someone in the Pentagon, why are we doing this? They'd say, oh, al-Shabaab is, they're a global terrorist group, which is just not the case. So that's what they would tell you. And as far as the success, I mean, we've seen, over the past year, al-Shabaab was gaining a lot of territory against the government, so much that Mogadishu was put under threat. And then they started this kind of counteroffensive that has resulted in this increase in U.S. airstrikes.
And I mean, it should shock our conscience, this getting close to 100 now bombing in civilian areas, but it just doesn't. And I guess maybe the lack of information, the lack of reaction is the story here in a lot of ways, don't you think?
Yeah. No, I think it kind of says a lot about our country, like that our government could be doing something like this. And, like I would be curious to see a poll, how many Americans are actually aware of this. I would say like 99% of Americans are not aware of this.
Yeah.
That this war is even going on. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. Like if you see the headlines a lot, like I usually put the number. I focus a lot on the number because it's like, isn't that a big number? Isn't bombing a country 97 times a lot? Shouldn't that get some attention? Even
Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz put forth a bill to end U.S. presence in Somalia. So even he is not on this right now. I mean, I guess I'm asking you for someone else's coverage, but you would think, there was some appetite.
Yeah. So Gaetz, actually, I talked to him about this. We did Timcast together. He guest hosted and we talked about it, and he said he's going to have me on a show about it. I got to follow up with him on that.
Yeah.
He's certainly curious to cover it. But so you mentioned that bill. It's interesting. So Ilhan Omar, who of course is from Somalia, she supported that bill. I think just because she probably felt she had to. But the fact is, one reason why we don't hear about this from her is because she supports the central government in Somalia.
Oh.
So kind of the only prominent Somali American in politics. Basically, I wouldn't go as far to say that she supports the war, she supports the airstrikes, but she supports the government that the U.S. is supporting here.
Yeah.
So that's why we just don't hear about it from her either.
Before I let you go, I mean, I guess there's not much else. All we can do is, call our representatives and say, we don't want to be doing this. I don't know how far that gets us. I want to ask you about your reaction to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia's presence in the United States. Now, the United States is the diplomatic answer is we need to create these allegiances with Saudi Arabia. They're very afraid of Iran, so we got to, support them for this. And we cannot make them a pariah like the Biden administration did. Now, yesterday, we did a piece here about how the United States has to continue to stay entangled with Saudi Arabia because of the petrodollar. We don't have a choice. But what do you make of that meeting? Did you hear any war drums that maybe were banging underneath in subtext?
From what I've seen in the past couple of years, I do not think right now that the Saudis are keen on joining this U.S.-Israel alliance against. So again, just from what I've seen in recent years, so Israel has this grand plan that they want to enlist all the Gulf countries into an alliance against Iran. That's the idea of the Abraham Accords, and that's something that the U.S. has wanted to do. But we've seen the Saudis kind of cool on that in recent years. They have, they normalized relations with Iran in 2023. And actually just about a month or 2 months before the what we're calling the 12-day war on Iran, Saudi Arabia's defense minister went to Iran and met with the Ayatollah. And another interesting thing is that when the U.S. was bombing Yemen, both under Biden and under Trump, the Saudis wanted nothing to do with it, which I thought, I think MBS has kind of reassessed the way he wants to do things now in the region after he waged a brutal 7-year war against Yemen and completely failed. And the Houthis ended up striking his oil infrastructure, which is ultimately what made him stop. So he was afraid of that happening again. So I don't think in the near future he has war on his mind, either with Yemen or Iran. But part of the, we're seeing him trying to consolidate this alliance with the U.S., getting these F-35 fighter jets and all this stuff. So maybe kind of down the line, he has his eye on the, being involved in a war with Iran. But right now, I don't see that something that they're really going to go for, the Saudis. And that was one thing before this war with Iran started, the U.S. and Iran were engaged in these negotiations on a nuclear deal. And one major difference between when Obama was negotiating one back in 2015 and when Trump tried to negotiate one, I don't know if he really tried, but a major difference was back in Obama's days, the Saudis were very against it. This time around, they supported it, and the Europeans were against it when the Europeans supported the one in 2015. So it's kind of a flip there. Yeah. So again, from what I'm seeing, I don't see MBS really being keen on the idea of war with Iran at the moment.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's such an interesting optic right now because it's such a change from the Biden administration. So, all right. Well, you can find Dave DeCamp on X, and you can also find his work at antiwar.com. There's also now antiwar.com show that you do on X. I enjoy that as well. So follow him on all the platforms. Thanks for coming to talk to us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.